This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and you asked for it, so you got it. This is a smackdown between the Asus ROG Zephyrus G15 with the AMD Ryzen inside. This one was a big hit several months ago when it came out, and the newer Zephyrus M16, which has Intel 11th Gen Tiger Lake CPU inside. So big difference there. We got blue versus red if you're into the team AMD or team Intel. I'm into whatever works the best for you. We're going to look at it now. So let's first talk about what's the same, because there is a lot of that. These use the same identical casing, and in fact, even the interior motherboard layout is much the same. The same heatsink, heat pipe assembly, that sort of thing, the same two M.2 SSD slots, single RAM slot because some of the RAM is soldered on board with each of these. Same keyboard, same trackpad, though the feel is ever so slightly different because the M16 has a rubbery interior coating and the trackpad has that to match it as well. So same ports. One difference though, and this has to do with the platform difference when it comes to ports. While the G15 has two USB-C ports, the M16, because it's running on Intel, and Intel has Thunderbolt as intellectual property, gets complicated, that's the way it is, has one USB-C and one Thunderbolt 4 port. So for those of you who are aficionados of Thunderbolt, well, you're going to be leaning towards Team Intel. Also, another difference with the new Intel platform is PCIe 4.0, which means potentially faster SSDs. Given the fact that the SSD is already so fast in these, and both of them in the United States are shipping with PCIe 3 SSDs anyway, I don't think that's going to matter for most folks unless you're into professional commercial video production, that sort of thing. Lots of small reads and writes. But it does allow for a fatter interface to the GPU. That said, on the M16, I'm not seeing, this is a 3060, it score any higher than 3060s that are running on a PCI X8 bus. So geeky stuff right there, right? The not so geeky difference here is while both of these are available with wide gamut full P3 QHD displays, basically 2560 by 1440 on the G15, you get a little extra height. You get a 16 by 10 aspect ratio, so 2560 by 1600, 0.6 inches bigger, and it does feel noticeably bigger. It's funny, you think 0.6 inches isn't that much, but the roominess, the height that you gain there is kind of nice, so that's a compelling thing, and you can't get that with the G15. While the displays are similar in terms of color gamut, contrast, and all that sort of thing, there is a difference in brightness, with the G15 being around 350 nits, which is pretty good, but the M16 is 550 nits. So if you're one of those people who has to use your laptop outdoors in really bright light, then you might find that pretty compelling, or you just really like bright displays. G15 is available in your choice of Eclipse Gray that we have here, or white, and we don't have the G15 in white, but we'll show you the G14 in white so you get an idea what that looks like. The M16 is available only in black. They both have the Mylar under the 4,000 little dots on the lid, and while our studio lights bring the bling and make those really light up and show, it really isn't, it's subtle in person. By the way, I've had dot-lidded Zephyrus machines for up to a year, and no, they don't particularly hold on to dust and dirt. So there you have it. Really, the big differences are going to be Intel versus AMD, QHD Plus, a little bit taller display, 16 by 10 versus QHD 16 by 9, and that PCIe 4.0, like I said, a little bit less important. Both of these have single zone RGB backlit keyboards. That means you can pick any color that you want, but only one color at a given time for the entire keyboard. Yeah. These are not meant to be super blingy. They do make things like the Asus Strix and Strix Scar series if you want RGB going every which way. The M16 is targeted a little bit more at creators. It only goes up to an RTX 3070. So you can get an RTX 3050 Ti and RTX 3060, which is what we have, whereas on the G15, a little more gaming oriented. So gamers, you're going to be more interested in the G15, not just because of the GPU, I'll tell you why, but you can get this with a 3060, a 3070, or a 3080 even for more GPU performance. Is this because Intel typically is more more thermally challenged and they were a little afraid of putting a 3080 in there? Maybe. So this is Intel's 11th Gen Tiger Lake 45-watt CPU solution inside of our M16. And it's a 10 nanometer process versus 7 nanometer on AMD. The smaller the nanometer process, generally the more efficiency in the CPU, a little bit less heat, better battery life, you know. So Intel is getting there. This is better than what they were stuck on for years, which was 14 nanometer. But still, the fan noise is more noticeable by 8 dB or so more, which is significantly a lot, 8 decibels more. And they have pretty much the same cooling solution inside. ASUS says they tweaked it a little bit. It sounds like the fans have a little bit more volume going now on the M16. So noise and heat-wise, I can see why no 3080 here, even with our 3060. Now, our G15 has a 3070. Our M16 has a 3060. You might say, Lisa, this is unfair. And in one way it is, but not in terms of pricing, because both of these right now list for $1849. You may find retailers who are gouging and charging you more because there are shortages on gaming laptops, but that is the list price. So you're looking at what you can get for $1849.99. That makes this a fair comparison. Obviously, I would love to have the 3070 to test on the M16 because it would make better use of the QHD display when playing games, whereas the 3060 has some trouble maintaining 60 frames per second on the most demanding AAA titles at QHD plus resolution. So the fan noise issue that I talked about with the M16, it's not a grating sound, but it really does verge on annoying. And if you live with anybody else, they're going to be like, turn your vacuum cleaner off kind of thing. That is a ding, obviously, against the M16. And that's running both of them in turbo mode and then trying custom fan profiles as well. Turbo mode is your go-to mode, usually for gaming and heavy content production kind of activities with the Zephyrus or any ASUS gaming laptop line model. In terms of surface temperatures, the G15 is actually a little hotter, and the CPU temperatures are a little hotter running in turbo mode, but not extremely hot. 80 centigrade, 85 centigrade for the CPU when doing something like Cyberpunk, which is very demanding, versus the Intel is very chill. I mean, they'll keep it at 75 to 80 centigrade, so surface temperatures correspondingly a little bit cooler. Both of these are pretty thin and metal clad, so you're going to feel the heat on them. Both of them blow heat out the sides, they have side vents, and out the rear. That's part of ASUS's ErgoLift design, where it lifts the laptop up to get a little air flowing underneath, but also vents out the back. So, I know some of you were thinking the 16:10 aspect ratio on the M16 would be suffering more from the heat that blows up because it goes all the way down. There's no big bottom bezel like the G15 has. Well, I tested with my heat gun while playing games, and I can tell you that surprisingly, the bottom of the actual LCD on the M16 gets as hot sometimes as 50 degrees centigrade, which is the same as the G15. So, you know, hotter it does rise, and we're not talking a whole lot of space really before temperatures would reduce and dissipate. So it certainly isn't any better off the G15 in terms of blowing heat against the screen, for those of you who are concerned about that. Now, ASUS says they've designed for it, high temperature tolerant displays, yada yada. I can't tell you this. I don't know. Some of the models that have used this design from ASUS are still running okay, and people are not claiming they have display failures. That's about as much as I can tell you. Going with the fact that the chassis are the same on these, the speakers are the same on these. You have a 6-speaker audio system, which is quite good. I have not had speaker crackling or problems with either of these retail units, so there's that. Trackpads are fine on these. The M16 has a little bit of bezel creak if you squeeze it near the top. Not that I typically squeeze my bezels, and the whole design of these is they are thin and light, so you can flex the lids on either of them just as much. But both of them have pretty good displays. I have a little bit more IPS glow on the M16, but actually rather both of them are quite good and some of the nicest displays you'll ever see on a gaming laptop. All right, how about actual performance, gaming and non-gaming? I mean, that's the point of laptops like these, isn't it? Again, 3060 versus 3070, but then this is what your $1,850 US buys you, so we'll call it fair. Clearly, something with a 3070 is going to do better, and yes, it does. Clearly, Intel has stepped up their game with Tiger Lake and the 10 nanometer process, and they are reaching competitive level with the AMD Ryzen 9 5900 CPU that we have in our G15. So really close enough there in performance for both of these. Some will win one test versus the other test. So I would call it a draw in terms of CPU speed. Now, if it's something like Blender or whatever, again, you'll see similar performance. Sometimes one will pull ahead of the other. Typically, I find AMD does a little better on Blender. Some people think that Intel does better on Revit. That's partly because of the config out of the box, so to speak, with Revit favors Intel, and you have to do a little more tweaking with your software setup for that reason, but both very performant. But GPU-wise, if you really want to game on it, I mean, you can game at this QHD resolution on the G15 and have your enjoyable 60+ frames in even the most demanding games all day, all night. It's great. It's lovely. Now with the M16, you've got to drop down to 1080p plus resolution, maybe to achieve the same thing. Or, you know, if you're playing a competitive first-person shooter like CSGO or something where high frame rates are given, they're both going to be fine. If Apex or League of Legends is your thing, though this would be a little overkill for League of Legends, this kind of selection of machines, then it matters less. But for those of you who want demanding games, yeah. For those of you who are doing things like Blender renders, yeah, I'd still go for the faster GPU if you could. Some other things like Photoshop, honestly, there's diminishing returns as you go up into higher and higher levels of GPUs. Lastly, there's battery life and the charger itself, surprisingly. So even though our M16 comes with a 3060, not a 3070, it has a 240-watt charger versus the Ryzen 9 that we have, 5900HX with a 3070, that has a more compact and lighter 200-watt adapter. So Intel is obviously using more watts, and yes, they do. You can look while you're playing games or anything like that, and Intel still does use more power. Other than the many ounces of portability difference between those chargers, though, in terms of battery life, you have the same 90-watt-hour battery in both. And for a 15-inch laptop, that's a big battery. That's wonderful stuff. And the Ryzen machine just runs about 2 hours longer on a charge, so 2.5 hours. Same brightness, same set of tasks for benchmarking. This is light productivity tasks, streaming video, that sort of stuff. So, yeah. So in the end, what it comes down to is, other than you're a real Intel or AMD fanboy or fangirl, or you know you want the 3080 GPU that you can only get in a G15 right now, what it comes down to is, to me, a laptop is supposed to be portable. So I think battery life is pretty important, especially the 15-inch size. If these were 17-inch desktop replacements, battery life's kind of like, to me, whatever. Probably I'm just moving that from room to room and not taking it everywhere. But if you're talking about thin and lights, particularly like these are, battery life is important, and the Ryzen just really wins on that. And it's a little bit lighter carry because of the smaller charger on board as well. Yet you're getting more performance out of it. So those things make me lean towards still the G15. That said, for those of you who have particular need for Intel, maybe AVX 512 extensions or something like that, not the most common need still, yeah, you want Thunderbolt dock. For sure, you got to have that. You like the idea of PCIe 4.0 because you are going to buy one of those new expensive fast SSDs. Well, that's what Intel does bring to the table too. And you do get that taller display, which is a treat, I have to say. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.